Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Marjorie Childress. I'm the managing editor of New Mexico in Depth, and we're having a discussion today with Trip Jennings, our executive director, and Justin Horwath, a reporter who just did this amazing story for us about efforts to uh, create a solar energy sector in New Mexico. So I thought maybe one way we could kick off our talk today is Justin, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, why you do reporting in this area, and kind of big picture context for why you thought this was an important story.
Yeah, I started out, I early in my career, I reported at a lot of the local publications here in New Mexico, the Santa Fe Reporter, the Santa Fe New Mexican, and others. And then I moved on to S&P Global Market Intelligence. That's what it was called at the time. Now they named it S&P Global Commodity Insights, but it's part of the larger Standard and Poor's brand. And so for 5 years, I covered renewable energy, like international markets, renewable energy finance. And so kind of got a lot of a big picture of what's going on. In the past 5 years, there's been a lot of movement in the industry in terms of trying to grow renewable energy in the United States and globally.
I know it's quite the background, and I could tell when you submitted your draft about the proposed Maxeon plant that would bring 1,800 jobs to the Albuquerque area if it successfully opens. It's a solar manufacturing company that's gotten quite a bit of federal and state support to locate here. I was like, wow, he kind of knows, he knew where to go find this stuff. So can you tell us a little bit about tell us why this is like important, like the big picture of, how situate the Maxeon project and this other larger effort to get more solar companies in New Mexico within this larger, what is all this about?
Yeah, so the electric power industry likes to call the electric grid the biggest machine ever created by mankind. And we have found out that that machine is contributing to climate change, from fossil fuel emissions. And so policymakers have passed, in various states, state incentives to phase out fossil fuels and grow renewable energy. And in 2022, President Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, which really supercharged growth in the industry. And it's kind of amazing if you just look at the charts, the amount of solar power, the amount of new power additions in the nation and in the world of new ones are mainly solar power. So it's outpacing coal, natural gas, and these fossil fuels. And in doing this, we found out that if we want to build more solar in the U.S., that we are dependent upon one of our main foreign adversaries, and that's China. China, there is a country that has most of the polysilicon that goes into the material used in solar panels. And so we have this whole kind of weird interdependence with China. We want to gain in energy independence, and so now we're trying to incentivize manufacturers to kind of sever our interdependence with China.
So and in particular, it's the creation of this polysilicon.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, and the polysilicon is China is by far the world's greatest manufacturer and seller of polysilicon, and that's I think that it's not even a competition. I mean, if you want if you want polysilicon, you probably have to go to China to get it.
Uh-huh. Because there's been some other, it's not just Maxeon, there's some other projects proposed for New Mexico that also would create that product.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, so is the Inflation Reduction Act, so all of a sudden New Mexico has seen a plethora of these companies say they're going to locate, and with Maxeon being the largest
Mhm.
in the state, in this area. Is the Inflation Reduction Act the main driver of that, or we often hear about these tariffs that have been slapped on Chinese products, or do you think that is the main driver?
I
Or are
think
they?
yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act, I think that is one of the main drivers of the investments, of making the investments themselves. I mean, it's been really incredible, covering renewable energy for S&P, just seeing, I've listened to hundreds of earnings calls, and and almost each one, the executives and CEOs are citing the Inflation Reduction Act as a reason for making these investments for the, um, they 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 see that they can, in the case of Maxeon, they can get a federal manufacturing tax credit. They can get their customers can get discounts too for buying American-made solar panels. But I think that the tariffs, so these are incentives that are driving executives to make these decisions to invest. But the tariff part of it, that'll be why they stay. If we have safeguards in place, if these companies feel like they can compete in a fair playing field, the tariffs are going to help with that.
Okay.
Can we just maybe explain for maybe folks who maybe don't know what tariffs do economically, which is raise the price of these Chinese products so American manufacturers can compete? Can we talk about for a second, just to make sure that everybody understands that's what the U.S. is doing?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of history there. I mean, Barack Obama, when he got elected, I mean, that's when renewable energy really kind of started to become mainstream. And the Obama administration did a lot to try to attract renewable energy developers and manufacturers. But and we saw this in New Mexico with Advent Solar and Shoot Solar, and these are other solar companies that tried to set up manufacturing facilities in Albuquerque. They only lasted a couple of years because of Chinese solar panels were flooding American markets. And China, because it doesn't have to pay as high of wages as the US, and because it has gained some manufacturing efficiencies that we haven't, their products are just so much cheaper than ours, and it's difficult to compete for American companies. And so, the Obama administration in 2012 they said, hey, let's start slapping some tariffs on these Chinese imports to make it a little fairer for American solar manufacturers.
And then Trump slapped on more, and then Biden increased it more. Is that right? Or
Yeah, and they kind of been stepping up. And to be honest, I think that Trump had I think it was around 30% tariff on solar panels and solar cells, and Biden recently increased that to 30%. That increase was, it didn't have like a big effect on the industry because the 30% tariff was already enough to disincentivize Chinese solar panel manufacturers from selling into American markets. So going from 30% to 50% didn't really change things, other than to maybe kind of send a message to the Chinese that we're serious about this, that we're gonna keep safeguarding US industry.
Can I add a little bit of just New Mexico context real quick? Because there was a point in time in the 2000s when Bill Richardson was the governor, Democratic governor, where they actually passed a Renewable Energy Transition Act or something like this, which would actually help create pipelines that had to run a certain amount of renewable energy. So New Mexico was kind of set up for this kind of thing, in addition to Advent and Shoot. I just want to just throw it out there as like maybe just New Mexico has been thinking about this for a while. That's all I wanted to add, just to say.
Yeah, I was really surprised when I first started reporting this story to learn that the developers in Mesa del Sol had, as early as 2005, envisioned this master planned community in Southeast Albuquerque, that where all the homes were powered by solar power, and there would be a solar power production factories right there in that field right next to it. And that really surprised that 2005. I mean, that's really early to have a vision like that. And so you're right. I mean, New Mexico, I think for a while has been it has seen this vision longer than others. I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, New Mexico is definitely, I see it as kind of like two tracks almost. It's transitioning our power grid in the state itself, really embracing trying to, and
Mhm.
it's like in so many ways, New Mexico is just like this odd kind of bird. Because, they had the whole like cap and trade thing that was happening in like California. Well, New Mexico did, went there too. And
Mhm.
had arguably had Diane Dennis won instead of Susanna Martinez, that would have happened. But Susanna Martinez, when she came into office, rolled all that back, that momentum. But it's a state, New Mexico is highly dependent on fossil fuels for its state budget. So, because, we have this huge Permian Basin and all the oil. And so, on the one hand, we have a state that has really embraced trying to move its electric grid away from fossil fuels with in more recent years, it's the Transition Act and other types of measures. Meanwhile, it also tries to nurture the oil and gas industry. And then there's this whole piece around trying to really develop a solar energy economy, which is actually not necessarily about transitioning our power grid, but it is about diversifying our economy away from fossil fuels because, the state has always just been so dependent on one industry. I mean, as long as I've been here, which is quite a long time now, it's just been a constant refrain. We've got to diversify. We've got to diversify. So, this kind of plethora of solar companies now announcing that they're going to locate here is just this dose of really bright news. It's kind of good news. So, what I'm hearing you say is that the Inflation Reduction Act might be a key driver of that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's driving all the investment. Mark Roper, the interim secretary for the Department of Economic Development here in New Mexico, told me, we've talked for a while about the need to move away from fossil fuels, but New Mexico can still be an energy state without necessarily being like a fossil fuel state. So policymakers, they've been, I think that it's almost impossible for them to not be aware and a little resentful of the fact that so much of their state budget comes from one industry. And so, diversifying that and using within the same sector too, energy. So yeah, I mean, I think that this has been on people's minds for a while. Can we do this? Can we move away from just kind of this state that has that relies on one industry for what is it, like a third of their budget or
Well, I mean, I think for folks who might be watching this later, it's right now, and it's been this way for as long as I've been here. It's more than the oil and gas industry through tax revenue and also, the large trust, right, that dump money into the state budget. All those revenue combined is more than 40% of the state budget
Wow.
every year.
yeah.
Because it's been in such the oil and gas industry is such a boom and bust cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Been in this boom. And, a big reason why New Mexico's state budget has increased as much as it has in recent years, the state budget has grown. And a lot of that has to do with these historic oil and gas revenues coming in.
And
He does.
I'll also want to say just real quick, this is why you will see for folks who may be listening or watching later, this is why the governor and the state lawmakers are creating these large endowments for state agencies, because, they're preparing for that day when maybe, who knows, the global markets aren't as high as far as the price of oil and producing as much tax revenue and stuff. So.
Yeah, I mean, to be frank about it, New Mexico, I mean, if we really want to think about the future, I mean, we have to think about peak oil. We have to think about a world in 2050 when most of the major governments across the world have foregone oil and gas as a primary source of power. And I think that a lot of policymakers, I don't think that reality has really hit them, that in 30 years, it's going to be very difficult to be a fossil fuel company. I mean,
in New Mexico, I have noticed a real shift in people's awareness on this topic at the State House. I mean, so I do think that it's on the minds of lawmakers up there. And peak oil, peak oil doesn't mean no oil. It just means it might get to the point where there's a plateau effect.
I want to add to Justin, to what you just said, and Marjorie also to what you said. The major oil and gas companies have been investing in renewables for a while. I mean, they know where this stuff is headed. It's not like it's not like they're not paying attention. They're all about, the future as well. So I think that needs to be said just real quick, just as maybe a footnote or something.
Yeah, I agree. Covering, that for 5 years, it was pretty amazing to me that the fossil fuel companies and even the oil majors see the writing on the wall. They see that they need to get into renewables to survive.
It's so
And
bad.
the case with Maxeon too, and sorry to interrupt there, but Total Energy SA of France, it's one of the largest fossil fuel companies in the world, for a while was one of Maxeon's largest investors. Not largest, larger investors. Yeah.
So maybe that's a good segue into like talking more about the Maxeon project, maybe. So maybe we could. So I want to hear a little bit more about. We had talked briefly before about just the solar technology. I mean, doesn't all of this technology stem from the United States in the first place?
Yeah, the solar the solar PV cell was invented in the 1950s in Bell Labs. I mean, solar energy is a uniquely American invention, and it took a while for us to get there to the point where you have commercially available solar panels and whatnot, but this is an American invention, and we really have ceded to China in both manufacturing and development, intellectual property in so many different ways over the course of decades. We've ceded this technology to China, really, in a lot of ways.
Sorry.
Well, I just was kind of wondering, these companies, so it's Maxeon is the big one that has announced for New Mexico, but there's these other ones too, like, the most recent one was Ebon Solar. Is there some kind of synergy that they might have by being here with our national labs, or is it, these are just pure manufacturing facilities without any R&D?
Yeah, they would benefit from R&D, and in fact, Sandia National Labs did a test of solar panels that Maxeon's ranked pretty well on. But yeah, it goes. It's almost with any industry, really. I mean, if you have research and development and education and just kind of that ecosystem. Oh yeah, I mean, if I'm a solar company, I'm looking for ways to take advantage of the research and development from the labs, or even as customers. The federal government also has priorities to go renewable for its own facilities. And yeah, so there's this whole ecosystem that can be created from not just research and development, but Maxeon's idea was they thought that if they could build this factory, that they can kind of start a little regional supply chain, New Mexico, Arizona, and kind of have that snowball into something bigger.
That's but Maxeon, your story really examined the prospects for this plant to actually be built.
Yeah.
So they're having a little bit of a rough patch at the moment. Do you want to talk about that, or?
Yeah, definitely. So Maxeon, it's headquartered in Singapore, and it actually it was spun off of an American company from San Diego called SunPower. And a spinoff is kind of like a little bit of a breakup. You guys, Maxeon could do better in developing and making the solar panels, and SunPower had this other segment. And so I'm losing my, what was your original question, Mark? I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here.
It's just their rough patch. Like what's
Oh
their
yeah, yeah. I mean, so Maxeon sells in global markets, and they're having to compete with China too. And so their revenue has been really hit by kind of a flood of cheap Chinese solar panels, and so they really had like a liquidity crisis. They didn't basically have enough cash, to meet their debt obligations and their future obligations, so they had to turn to their largest shareholder. And we'll just use the shorthand for the company name and call them TZE. They're a company that's headquartered in northern China. And now, and so, Maxeon was in a lot of trouble. They were facing a revenue crunch. And so they turned to their largest shareholder, this TZE company, and basically gave shareholder control over to TZE in a $200 million deal. And so there are a lot of questions about whether, Maxeon can finance this facility, which could cost up to $1.9 billion. They in their May 30th earnings call, they said that this year they could lose up to 20 million. And so they're in a cash crunch right now, and it's really kind of a turning point for Maxeon. Their parent company, SunPower, and actually just went bankrupt. And the solar companies are not doing very well in this current market environment. I think Maxeon is really hoping that they can get this facility across the finish line. They can find financing, and if they do, it's probable that their stock will rise, that that they can find a lot more success. But right now they're not there yet.
And part of that has to do with the geopolitical economic trade war that's going on between the U.S. and China, right?
Yeah,
So
definitely.
some of the challenges, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just kind of funny. This is all international, global stuff on this is working, but I think I think that a lot of developers have been upset that Europe is not placing more like duties and tariffs on Chinese solar panels, and so Maxeon is having to compete with China all over the world, and Europe and Africa and different markets, and so. Yeah, I mean it's hard for them, and they need tariff safeguards apparently to compete with these Chinese products.
So interesting. I mean, it really speaks to how, I mean, I think a big takeaway probably for me, it's a reminder that, when we read all the national, international news about, trade wars and tariffs, and that it really affects us here on the ground in New Mexico, because we keep trying to develop this industry in the state. It keeps stumbling. It doesn't quite happen. And now it's like it feels like we're on this cusp once again. And it just feels really tenuous, which is kind of what we said in the story.
Yeah, it is very tenuous, and yeah, as we said in the story, it does depend on the whims of just the world leaders, global leaders. Whether New Mexicans have jobs can really actually depend on the whims of President Xi in China. There's not much we can do about it, except for maybe if you're a policymaker, before offering these incentives or kind of thinking about how to attract companies or what companies to attract, you have to factor that in. I mean, Advent Solar, the state attracted them, and a couple of years later, they're laying people off. They were closing their facilities, so this really affects people's lives. And I think from a state policymaker perspective, maybe think about what attracting companies and industries that offer stability is you can't always do that, but yeah, this is a very tenuous thing here. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I really enjoyed about your story and getting into it and editing in it and stuff like this was really the point that there are these external forces outside of New Mexico's control that really would determine the jobs. And let me say this, we also have to remember that the one huge industry in New Mexico, the traditional industry, also is affected by international markets, the oil and gas
Mhm.
industry.
Yeah.
So you have a similar thing going on with a new technology. And I just found that extraordinarily interesting because sometimes it is hard. It's very difficult to see the external forces that are maybe invisible to most folks that actually can determine the success or failure or something, some large economic development project.
Yeah, and there's almost nothing you can do about it, right? I mean, if you get hired at this new, if Maxeon builds a plan, a worker gets hired, and maybe they vote for one presidential candidate over the other based off their, stance on tariffs. But other than that, there's not much you can do about it. Yeah.
No, it's fascinating. Well, I mean, I really appreciate the reporting, Justin, and maybe we'll watch avidly to see what happens with Maxeon, as well as some of the other companies that are opening up. Any final thoughts from that either of you want to offer?
Yeah, I mean, I just real quick. I mean, if you do want to find out what's going on with Maxeon, I believe that they have an investor conference at the end of the month. And anybody can go to their website and tune in and watch it. And I think that doubtless they'll have news about this facility. Don't put, I want to say it's the August 29th, but don't hold me to that. But
Do your own research,
yeah, I mean, New
viewers.
Mexicans, and this is going to be important for the policymakers, energy folks, New Mexicans. Yeah, check out that call, and there'll probably be some news about this factory pretty soon.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks,
Chris.
Justin.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.